Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries podcast. I'm joined by my lovely wife Hannah, and we're doing our Day 11 RPGaDay 2019 video. The word for today is examine. And you were making an interesting point just then, love, about examine being a fairly generic skill in RPGs.
Yeah, every game's got some sort of an equivalent of it. Some role that you end up doing, you know, twice a session. If you're going to be doing 10 rolls in a session, 2 of them are going to be that investigate skill.
So I suppose the obvious examples are like in D&D, you sort of like your search and your perception skill and stuff like that.
It's perception in White Wolf as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like perception alertness in White Wolf. It's like a dice pool system.
That was it.
And yeah, they tend to be like your general sort of like spot rolls. You know, like say you roll at least twice a game to see whether you notice someone's about to attack you or you notice a particular clue. Now, one of the things I have heard a lot of people say and a lot of GMs say, sort of online when I've been reading about various investigative type games, is that often if you place your reliance on an examined skill, and let's say the plot relies upon the gathering of a particular clue or a particular piece of information, and then everyone just flat out fails the roll, which is always a possibility where like dice are involved, your game can just come to a stop, and then you either have to like come up with some implausible reason for them to make the roll again, or you end up just like giving them the information. Now, I know some of the investigative games I've seen, like Trail of Cthulhu and stuff like that, and I've seen people advocate this online and saying that like if people need a piece of evidence to continue the game, and you're going to probably end up giving it them regardless of whether they make the dice roll or not, why not just give it to them in the first place rather than have them go through the whole rigmarole of making dice rolls?
See, it can be a problem in that, but it's also that it's giving other players a chance to find a certain piece of information. Like you might expect one character to find something, and instead somebody else gets the natural 20 on that roll.
Yeah.
So they know that odd, obscure bit of information instead of the bard who rolled a 3.
See, now I know that I mentioned Trail of Cthulhu earlier on, and it's a sort of spin-off of based on the Gumshoe system by Robin D. Laws. Trail of Cthulhu is written by Kenneth Haidt, and it's taken a slightly different spin on investigations. Obviously, if you look at Call of Cthulhu and stuff like that, investigating stuff's a whole lot of what the mythos is about. In Trail of Cthulhu, you have like a whole different like raft of like what I call investigative abilities. So like accounting's an investigative ability, architecture's an investigative ability. In Gumshoe and in Trail of Cthulhu, the rules separate the business of finding clues from like confronting monsters or your more standard tests. The way it describes it here is it says, in a fictional mystery, whether it's a mystery novel, a straight-up detective show like Columbo or whatever, the emphasis isn't on finding the clues in the first place. Normally there's like plenty of clues. When it really matters, you get a paragraph telling you about the particular clue and what happened, but the action really starts after you gather the clues. So the idea is that it's hard enough once you've got a set of different clues to figure out how they all fit together and what like the plot of the bad guy or the mystery is, without someone like holding back half the pieces from you, which I can sort of see the point of, because if you've got a game with say 5 clues in and you only succeed at 2 of the tests, what chance have you really got at piecing the mystery together if you've got less than half the clues? The way it works in Trail of Cthulhu is, to gather a clue, it's dead simple. All you have to do is get your investigator into a scene where relevant information can be gathered, and you have to have the right ability to discover a clue. So let's say we're talking about architecture as an investigative ability. If there's something wrong with like the way the building's built, let's say, to use a ridiculously stereotypical example, that 5 buildings are laid out in the shape of a pentagram. If I get into that scene where I can see all the buildings and I've got architecture, the GM's like, psh, you notice this. Now, as long as you do those things and you tell the keeper you're looking for clues, you will never fail to gain a piece of information. Now, what you can actually do is once you've got that information, you can then make tests, but that's not to find the clue. But if you make a good test, you then get additional information. So as long as you've got the abilities and you're in the right place, you'll always get the basic clue, but you still get an advantage for having a higher ability in like your investigative field, because you might be like, oh, well, all right, these 5 buildings are built in the shape of a pentagram. Can I use my role to sort of find out more about the period they were built in, so we could potentially look up like the original architect and stuff like that. But even if you fail that role, you still know the 5 buildings are built in the shape of a pentagram, so you've still got the basic information to go on.
This is something that I've come across when we were writing games for the Games on Demand.
Yeah.
Where if I was going to, because I do quite mystery type stories for that.
Yeah.
Anywhere where there was going to be a clue, I'd write a list of like 1 to 6, I think it was, of sort of from the most obscure to the most obvious piece of information.
Yeah.
So like, so for example, you go past the alien space station.
Yeah.
And you get, if you get a -1, because it was a fate system game, you get some information, but it's a little bit misleading. If you get a 10, you get all the details because you've done a really good roll with your spaceship scanners. If you get somewhere in between, you'll get some of the details, and it'll depend on who's operating the scanners as to which details they get and how they're going to interpret them.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing to come back to, like, talking about it being like a fairly generic skill in lots of D&D style games. One of the things I quite like about the sort of older D&D is because they don't really tend to have skill systems, you don't tend to have those. It's more about the sort of player action. So instead of like, I'm not saying everyone in like later versions of D&D does this, but you can, in some games, you can sort of roll into a room and be like, I'm going to make a search check. And depending on that role, you find out what's going on in the room. Whereas in the sort of like the OSR games, it tends to be more about if you walk into a room and it's described, you then have to say like, all right, I'm going to look in the desk. I'm going to look, see if there's a secret area in the wardrobe. And it becomes more about describing it.
Yeah, it's taking it from a board game to a story, depending on how you do it.
I do quite like that, because I think that rewards like players sort of like buying into the mystery and thinking like, oh, where's the next clue? But again, I still do think I'm still a big fan of if you've got a heavy investigative game, why not just like give the players the clue, and then you still get as a GM, you still get as much entertainment watching the players trying to piece it together, and they're hopefully not getting as frustrated because if they can't fit it together, you can always go and look for more clues. You can always like try a few different theories out. Whereas if you've made all the rolls and you've failed them and you've got no clues, where do you go from there? So I think that pretty much covers Examine. I mean, I'm a big fan of the OSR sort of like player action instead of just skills, or if it's going to be an investigative game, sort of just like giving people the clues as long as they go to the right place and they've got the right skills, and then just let them spend their time piecing them together rather than tearing their hair out.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's it for RPGaDay 11 Examine. We'll be back shortly with our next episode. Take care.